day, Dr. Tom Preston. Thank you for joining us. This is Dr. Kaveh Lahun joining you guys from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and another fantastic episodes of Wellness Influencers. Today we have Dr. Tom Preston joining us, and we are going to talk about a subject which I'm going to let him explain. So please, without further ado, go ahead, Dr. Preston, give us the introduction, please.
Hey, Kaveh, thanks so much for having me on your amazing podcast here. So the title of our conversation today, and I really want this to be a conversation. Hopefully the audience can feel, through the medium, Kaveh, right? But the title is Procrastinate Your Way to Success. Okay, and that's a pretty contrarian kind of a thought process because most people I interact with think procrastination is a negative thing. It's a dirty word, and it's kind of one of those funny little like weird bedroom secrets, Kaveh. Everybody does it, right?
That's right.
But they kind of don't want to admit it out loud. But what I'm offering is a bit of a refuge from that negativity of procrastination because in my experience now, 20 plus years in the consulting industry and over 30 years as a chiropractor in the wellness industry, I contend that the most successful, influential people I've ever met do procrastinate regularly on things that don't support their values. And that's really maybe a jumping off point for this dialogue for us.
Fantastic. I had the honor of meeting you and listening to one of your talks, and it was definitely quite energizing. And that whole self-love that you taught us was amazing. Although it sounds so cliche, but would you be able to speak some to that about basically self-love and how we have forgotten all about ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely, Kaveh. Well, it's definitely a hand in glove tie into this conversation around procrastination because my experience, and I'm just going off of my experience, right? So I don't want to profess to have all of the answers to the universal wisdom here, but I can tell you from experience that procrastination is a thing, and procrastination is not an act of lack of self-love, Kaveh, but in the right context, it is actually an act of self-love. And let me explain, okay? Because I contend at the core of each one of us is something that's special, it's unique, it's, one of my friends says it this way, God doesn't make any junk, So 7.7 billion of us on the planet, we're all special, we're all unique, just like a DNA helix or a thumbprint, So, but inside each one of us is something special and unique that wants to express itself. It's not just enough to have it in there, it wants to express, okay? And when each one of us, in my worldview, when each one of us is expressing our unique genius to the world, our unique gifts to the world, the little green and blue planet spins easier on its axis. There's more familial joy, less social unrest. I mean, all of that stuff. And that's kind of an expansive view, but let me try and bring it down into an individual person standpoint. Because how do we get in touch with that's inside of us that I spoke about? Okay, and that's where we talk about core values. And core values are a way to bring in the intangibles into the tangible. It's the way to bring that essence of who we are into space and time, into a form of writing, so that we can get clear about who we are and who we're not. And what I find a lot of challenge, Kaveh, in the world, particularly in the world of business or just in the healthcare world with people's own individual health, is there's an enormous amount of stress. Mm-hmm. And I contend that a chunk of that stress comes from, or initiates at its foundation, at its basement, is a lack of clarity about who we are and who we're not. Because in my experience, all of us are a byproduct of our influences in our life. Our parents, our teachers, our preachers, our well-meaning people that have touched our lives in some way, and that's fantastic. But what we may have done is we may have inadvertently bought into their value system instead of really getting clarity on our own. And as we spoke in Victoria, Kaveh, right, when I met you, there's that little voice in the back of our head that's commonly communicating to us, right? And when it's using words like, oh, I ought to do this, I've got to do this, I need to do this, or I should do this, be very mindful of that voice because it's probably somebody else's voice. It's somebody else's values that you've inserted into the back of your mind, maybe without even being aware of it. And so buying into somebody else's values instead of living according to your intentions, according to your values, literally creates an internal state of stress. So to follow up on that, when you hear yourself saying words like, I love to do this, I desire to do this, I choose to do this, that's a completely different energy, completely different vibration. And my experience with it is people that are living in that place, from that mindset, from that intention, are living much more joyous, happy, fulfilled lives. Their stress goes down. And from a health standpoint, of course, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, stress is one of the biggest negatives in our life today with respect to our health. So reducing that stress by getting the clarity of who we are, who we're not, living according to our values, and then setting goals, which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about, Kavi, both in our businesses and our personal lives and our health, around our values. Boy, now we've got a life of intention, a life of choice, and a more meaningful life for that person based upon who they've come to know themselves to be.
Now, Dr. Tom, we all have these moments that we seek of, who are we? What is my values? Is there any sorts of pearls of wisdom that you like to share with the listeners to guide us, or at least give us clarity on how we can seek our ultimate, who am I, basically, question?
Yeah, well, I got several thoughts on that, Kavi. And one is, and this is a bit, again, sort of not traditional thinking, but it's getting clarity about who you're not, right? Because knowing who you're not or what you don't value and love in your life is actually a good funnel approach to bring you down towards who you are and who you know yourself to be, right? So there's an exercise I've done in my coaching programs for years, Gabby, where we literally get people to answer this question over and over and over again. And the question is literally as simple as, who am I? And then people will start to talk about the roles that they play in their life, but particularly in a live retreat scenario where you get people in a dyad where they're sitting face to face. And the only conversation is done in complete silence except to answer that question. Tell me who you are. And people start to talk a lot, but they mostly talk about the roles that they play, right? I'm a father, I'm an athlete, I'm a business person, I'm a healer, I'm a friend, I'm, all of these different roles we play, and those are very important to us. But it doesn't necessarily answer the question, who am I, right? Tell me who you are. And so when people, they start to get confused, I've even had some people get ticked off, it's like, because we want them to get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper down into the essence. So that's an exercise that I would recommend, is to just answer the question, tell me who you are. And then once you get past the roles, what's beneath that? Or as one of my mentors said, Kaveh, he says, what or who is in the space between the thoughts? Now we get into some pretty interesting reflective points about essence, about, what I would call your most authentic self, or what some people call soul or spirit, right? And what is that? And what does that look like? And then, you can stay kind of in the intangibles, and some people have a hard time with the intangibles because it's intangible, it's infinite. And we live in a world of space and time, Kaveh, as you know, that's all finite. We think that there's always something to it. When you start to think about something that's maybe always existed, or energy, because we know energy can't be created nor destroyed, it can only change forms, which kind of implies it's always existed. I mean, that's hard to wrap my finite brain around, but I love to play with, with the idea, So there's a couple of pieces there. Knowing who you're not, answering the question, tell me who you are, tell me who you are, tell you who you are. I'll tell you another exercise, Kaveh, okay? People, this was a kind of a shortcut, and we've got a much more expanded exercise questionnaire we get our clients to go through, right? To really go through the core values piece and so on, but here's a shortcut. Is your listeners could answer this question, and it could be kind of written two ways. One, if you only had 24 hours to live, you knew there was a cataclysmic event coming or whatever was coming, you only had 24 hours. What would you do, and what would you say, and with who? And that could be a shortcut, Kaveh, into what it is that they value most, because what you value most is what you would probably do with your last 24 hours. It's who you would talk to. It's who you would spend time with, right? I said another way, I've had another mentor of mine say it this way. He said, imagine you're at your transition ceremony, your funeral, so to speak, Kaveh, right? And then it's like, what if you wrote your own obituary? Right? Write your own obituary, because in your obituary, you would be able to write about who you knew yourself to be, what was important to you in your life. So there's many different tools and exercises, Kaveh. I've got a pretty big toolbox of them, but there's a couple of shortcuts that maybe some listeners could take advantage of.
It is amazing. I mean, all the points that you brought up, it's definitely once truly, if you sit down and think about it, it revolutionizes the one's belief about themselves too, you know. Ultimately, as you said, we are all energy, you know, all this, our DNA, our cells are made out of these molecules, and our molecules are made out of these atoms, and atoms are known to be energy.
Yes.
So the energy obviously can't be, it can transfer from one shape to another.
Yes.
And in today's society, we have forgotten that we are energy, and we walk with this hollow and halo of the energy, and we can emanate it through ourselves. Some choose to do positive, some choose to do negative. But this positive energy, the effects of it has that on human and on other people, basically on your family, your friends, your kids. Can you speak some to that what this positive energy does to us and our surrounding?
Yes, for sure, Kavi. And it's something I've put a fair bit of intention and reading and study into, you know. And I'll reference for the listeners, if they've never had a chance to explore the heart math, literally like the heart, like the beating heart math institute, I would definitely give them as a reference to that, because they've done an enormous amount of research, Kavi, on the interconnections between the heart and the brain, the heart and the mind, if you will, okay? And they've talked about, and some of their studies are fascinating. And they talk about the energy field, which they've got instrumentation that can measure it. It's in milligauss, but it's a very subtle energy, but it's measurable. And they've done studies, Kaveh, where they have shown people that have lots of negative, dark energy thoughts and stuff, you know, and what happens to their energy field, and kind of almost happily it compresses, you know, but when they're in a state of love and gratitude and fulfillment, it expands, right? And they talk about how this energy field, Kaveh, can literally be measured 6 to 12 feet in front of someone, you know?
Wow.
So you can walk into a room. Have you ever noticed this, Kaveh, right? Where you walk into a room and someone that's just like what I referred to as a bright light, they walk into the room and, you know, it's a metaphor, but like the room seems to get brighter. It's because they're bringing in that positive energy. And again, I don't know about you, Kaveh, and the listeners, but man, I would rather hang out with that person than somebody that's like the Peanuts character Schleprock, you know, who's got the little dark cloud around his head and stuff all the time, you know? Because again, here's the other thing that the HeartMath Institute enrolled me in from their studies is that energy it influences us. It's kind of like it's contagious a little bit, you know? And when you're around somebody who's in a dark, ugly, pissy mood and stuff, all of a sudden you notice you start to get kind of on that side of life too. And again, not to suggest that there isn't enough things in life that can balance us out and you know, bring us down at times, Kaveh, but it's not a question of whether we get knocked down or not in life. The question is do we notice it? How do we respond to it? And do we choose to get back up and get going again? There was a famous interview I saw years ago from the NFL running back Emmitt Smith, who to this date I still think holds the record for the most yards in the NFL from a running back. And he was being interviewed, and what the interviewer said, he says, you know, it's just amazing to me that, you know, you ran for like whatever the distance was. It was like 11 miles or something net over time, Kaveh, you know, and stuff. And that, you know, it's just incredible that you could do that and stuff. And but yet, you know, you got knocked down like by these big people, big linebackers and stuff, you know, and you know, it's just amazing to me you did that. And Emmitt says, well, you know, I appreciate your conversation and your expression here of the, you know, what I did. But he says, what impressed me more about myself was that I got back up again. Right, you know, and that's really one of the keys, Kaveh. It's not, you know, there's things going to happen in life that will, you know, beat us up, knock us down. But do we notice? What do we choose to do about it? And how quickly do we choose to, again, I would use the word respond versus react, because when we respond, we bring in the construct of choice. Whereas a reaction is more like you know, a knee-jerk thing with a hammer on the knee tendon, right? Where it goes whether you think about it or not. It's like a spinal cord reflex. But when you're actually in a place of response, you can choose how you respond. And, you know, here's a challenge to listeners, if they kind of, well, this is kind of interesting, but I wonder. Say, just try and think about the darkest, most ugliest, most depressing thoughts you can for the next, like, 2 days. And like, there isn't anybody I know that'll ever take that challenge on because they almost innately or intuitively know it's not going to be healthy for them, you know?
That's right.
So that's the other side of that as well. And let's focus more on the and not just so much the positive pieces, Gavi, for me, but also the fulfilling pieces, the loving pieces, those pieces, again, because there's effort involved in that, and there might be some ups and downs in that, but oh my goodness, out of that comes the joy of the sense of fulfillment that goes with that.
Wow. And fulfillment is such a huge topic. The life purpose and basically, because these are all go hand in hand, life purpose, the energy. So for advice for the people who are seeking that life fulfillment, what is it that they can do to bring that about that gives them an inner peace?
Great question.
Makes them more in tune with their life.
Great question. We have 7 hours, right, Kaveh? Is that to answer that question? Okay, so let's do the Coles or Cliff Notes version of the answer, or at least my perspective on it, right? Yeah. So again, I'll come back and I'll circle back, or come full circle, which I should probably name a company after that someday, Kaveh. Full Circle. I did one day. Anyways, a little inside joke. But again, I will come back to the things we talked about earlier, because you said they're all interconnected, right? So I would say it starts, a fulfilling life, in my experience, starts with knowing who we are and who we're not, as we had an earlier dialogue about, okay? And I'll go back, because I've traced this back to Plato on that one, who apparently was a pretty sharp guy. I never knew him. He lived quite a few thousand years ago. Apparently pretty sharp character. And he said it this way. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's been a mantra for me for many years, and it's a way to drive into this piece of purpose and the fulfillment that comes from it. So to me, always the starting place is that, right? Is getting that clarity of who you are, who you're not. From that, which is very much linked to it in hand in glove, we spoke about it earlier, just to reiterate real quickly, an expression of that as expressed through your core values analysis is a way to sort of personify that in time and space. And then from there, Kaveh, there's an exercise that I'd love to share. It's one of our consulting program. It's called I know I am successful when, and then you fill in the blank, okay? And this comes out of an exercise one of my coaches did for me many years ago, many years ago. And he said, Tom, how do you know when enough is enough? What do you mean? He says, how do you know enough time with your spouse is enough? How do you know enough marketing enough? How do you know enough new clients enough? How do you know enough money enough? How do you know enough vacation enough? How do you know enough sports time enough? How do you, Kaveh, I was overwhelmed. And I said, please stop the fire hose. And at that point, Kaveh, I didn't have the answer to one of those questions, not one. Not because I just hadn't reflected long enough, you know? But now I can answer any of those questions in a couple of seconds, because I've examined my life. I've determined who I am and who I'm not. And as a result of that, I've got clarity about my definition of success. And as we walk our clients through this, Kaveh, in our coaching programs, we literally thousands of people now, we've walked through this program. With only one exception of thousands, everybody who's done it, when they actually define success for themselves, they realized they were a far greater success than they thought themselves to be. Ave, that is an unbelievable awakening. It's an unbelievable sense of like a monkey off your back kind of thing, energy lifting, right? Because people realize, wow, you know what? Like, I'll speak more about it maybe from a marketing standpoint, but there's, people in the clothing industry who want women to believe that you're not successful physically unless you're a size 0. I don't know any size zeros, and if I did, I don't hang out with them,
That's right.
And God love them if that's ideal for them and so on. But, it's like, because of different influences in life, people may have bought into, oh, well, I'm a size 10, so maybe I will never be physically beautiful. Horse hockey to that. I don't buy that. People say, if I'm not a multimillionaire, I'm not successful financially. Well, no, who said that? Who said you have to be a multimillionaire? Nothing wrong with being a multimillionaire, but maybe that's not everybody's path. I was speaking with a young client today out in the west part of Canada, and he was saying, you know what? I think in 20 years from now, I'm kind of a nomad. I think I'd like to have the choice to be able to go and live on top of a mountain in the Himalayas and meditate all day. I said, what an awesome idea, But what he wanted, Kav, is he wanted the choice. And that's really a distinction, right? Because when we take our own definition of success, and this could really lead into a good goals conversation, Kav, which talks to the procrastination piece. But once you've defined success for yourself, you can now hold yourself accountable to living your life by your standards, by your ideals, by your ways that you want to be in the world in terms of what we call the hologram of life, your physical life, your mental life, your spiritual life, your social life, your family, your career. And you know what, Kavi, heaven forbid that, today's you and I, my friend's last day on the planet. I don't intend that, but I mean, who knows for sure,
Yeah.
And Kavi, if it is, at least I can say I did it my way.
Mm-hmm.
Did it according to my values, to my way of being. And you know what? The last thing I would want for anybody listening to this, Kavi, or certainly for you or I, my friend, is to sit on our deathbeds and go, I got regrets. I got resents. I did it somebody else's way. I lived somebody else's life. I really believe, Kavi, that is the nexus of the midlife crisis that people get. They wake up realizing they're living somebody else's bloody life. They're not living their life.
So very true.
Oh, and guys, they go out and, they start undoing they go to the gym, they unbutton their shirts to their navel, and they buy a Harley, right? Ladies usually show up differently, but, maybe they don't unbutton their blouses to their navel, hopefully, but they, there's that midlife crisis, I think, commonly comes out of this wake-up call that they're living somebody else's life, So again, I think I directly, indirectly answered that question, Kyle.
Yeah.
There's definitely some pieces there about living your life and your ideal, living your life with intention.
But Tom, you and I both agree that the biggest obstacle to success is oneself and one's sabotage.
Yes.
We always think I'm not worthy, or I can't do it, or that's almost impossible to do. Yet we forget that the whole process of how we got to this living space, it was impossible, but we beat the odds anyway.
Yes.
So can you speak to some of that? How can we quieten that voice of not being worthy, or that's way above my head, or I can't reach that?
Absolutely. So let's get a little bit more context, Kavi, right? And I think I spoke about this in Victoria. That just seems appropriate now. But Deepak Chopra, who's a pretty well-known writer and a medical doctor who's done a lot in the world, books and seminars and stuff. But when I studied with him years ago, he showed that 95% of the thoughts we have today are negative self-talk. And the sad part, Kavi, is that 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday. So we I loosely say it this way: people have 3 black belts and 2 PhDs and beating the heck out of themselves, So here's my question, Kavi, and I'll frame it into an exercise. What is it that makes us think that we're not good enough? That we're not, whether we're not, strong enough, smart enough, sexy enough, lean enough, whatever enough is. And I would go back, Kavi, a piece of that, for me, the answer to that, part of that answer is to go back to what I just discussed. We're buying into somebody else's definition of success. And we're using that as the benchmark or the litmus test for whether we're a success or not. So, I mean, hey, Kavi, if I had to, on the sports standpoint, if I had to be a Olympic gold medal decathlon champion, I had to be a Michael Jordan in the NBA, I had to look a certain way, drive a certain car, blah, 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 and I was judging myself, either conscious or subconscious against it, I would feel like a huge failure. But when your measuring stick is your own, when your measuring stick, your litmus test, your benchmarks are based upon your standards, your ideals, right? Now, all of a sudden, and again, I'm going off experience in my own life, Kavi, as well as many other, like thousands of clients, that lightens the mood a lot. It allows us to quiet that little voice so that we're not so darn hard on ourselves. Because as we both know, what you focus on grows. So you focus on negativity and I'm not enough, guess what? You're going to get more of that in your life. But when you focus on, you know what, I'm not quite where I want to be yet, but I'm on the path, I'll go back to a Martin Luther King quote on this, Kavi. It's just a mantra for me. He says, you don't have to see the full staircase to take the first step, right? So you don't necessarily have to have all of the answers to your life's purpose and what's fulfilling for you, but maybe you can see what the next step is for you. And maybe that next step is to, as we talked in Victoria, just look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, you're worthy. That is a surprisingly difficult exercise for people to do. People say, it sounds kind of hokey. I say, well, you know what? Maybe it is. It can't hurt you. Would you be willing to give it a try? And as we spoke off air, Kavi, right? When people do that, it's like, wow, that can be like a game changer,
Definitely.
Literally just to communicate to yourself some of that self-love and some of that, appreciation for your life, as it is.
Well, to be honest with you, Tom, I always explain to my practice members that our life is like vehicles. When you sit and drive, if your eyes are taken off your destination or your goal, doesn't matter which way you're looking, the vehicle will veer that way too.
Yes.
So if you look at the obstacle, you're going to hit that obstacle. If you look at your final goal as being what you want to achieve, that's where you're going to be going. So for goals, you touched some few points on before. To make the goals achievable, how high do you need to set them? Because you know how there is, they say, put them so low that you can achieve them, or put them so high that it's 10x. Where does Tom put his goals, and how do you keep yourself more goal-oriented and wanting to achieve it?
Great question, Kaveh, right? And again, I loved how you phrase that, because it's like, this is my perception, right? Because I've had teachers on both ends, make them realistic. You know, I had one teacher one time who said, you know, shoot for the stars, Tom, and if you miss, at least you'll land on the sun. You know, it's like, oh, wow, that's a neat idea, you know? And so I think there's a value to both, Kaveh, so thank you for asking the question, Lee. I think it's really perfectly poised, right? So one thing I want to definitely enroll the listeners in, which one of my mentors enrolled me in many years ago around goals, well, several things, but number one, goals must support or be linked to your values. If they're not supported or linked to your values, then again, going back to where we started this dialogue, you should be procrastinating on all of those goals that don't support your values, because they're not in alignment with the essence of who you are. And all of the creativity and the power and the wisdom that comes from the essence of who we are is going to be lost because you're buying into somebody else's dream. So that's number one. Number two, the acronym SMART. Make sure your goals are SMART, okay? And for me, I have a little twist on how this is commonly reported in the literature, but SMART for me, the acronym SMART stands for S is specific. You must be very, very, very concise and specific, or else how would you ever know whether you achieved it? Commonly, as we're coming, into the new year time, a lot of people say, oh, I want to lose weight. Well, okay, so you lost 1/4 ounce. Yay, you won, when really, they wanted to reduce their body mass by 2%, or they wanted to release an inch of body waist measurement, or lose 10 pounds, which, by the way, I always say to people, please don't ever lose weight. Because you lose it, you can find it again. Okay? Release it, and it's gone, right? Okay, so the S is specific. Number two is measurable, which ties to the specific, because if it's not measurable, you don't know whether you achieved it or not, right? And this goes back to fulfillment, Kaveh, because people that are setting intentions or goals and then are achieving them, that's a recipe for fulfillment for sure, right? So specific, measurable, the A is aligned with your values. We already spoke about that. And this is the hard one for most entrepreneur-focused people, Kaveh, is the R, realistic. Okay, because I'm a hopeless optimist. I often think I can accomplish more in a week than any 10 humans can in a month, so that's nothing wrong. It's not a moral discussion, but it creates a consequence where you can, trip and fall on your own sword, so to speak, and then use it as an excuse to beat yourself up and not love yourself, right? So realistic, and I'll speak to that jump for the stars thing, Kaveh, because I think there's something inside of us that knows if it's realistic or not, okay? And then the T is time bound. So you set a time frame, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, whatever it is, okay? So specific, measurable, aligned with values, realistic, and time bound. So here's how I do the realistic part, Kaveh, right? I believe that there's definitely, most people set goals too small. And I've certainly been guilty of this at times, which is kind of in defiance to my optimistic piece, because in the past, if I set them way too high and I didn't achieve them, again, as I said, I used an excuse to beat myself up. Okay, so with the realistic piece, what I do is say, look, if this is your comfort zone, like the little box, right? I want it outside of the comfort zone, but not so far outside of the comfort zone that it activates that little voice in the back of your head that goes, hey, Tom, you idiot. Who do you think you are setting a goal like that? You never achieved the last goal you set like that. What makes you want to keep that little voice quiet and sitting in the corner with the dunce hat on, Kaveh, okay? So again, that's my little internal dialogue piece. If I get too grandiose, that little guy kicks in. So I want to be just on the edge of that sort of comfort zone, so to speak.
Well, Tom, to be honest with you, speaking with you, it just opens up so many avenues and questions. And it's just, you're a breath of fresh air, especially when it comes to, you go full circle from perception to accepting who you are and working toward who you want to be, basically setting goals and thriving it. And one thing that you had mentioned before, that we self-sabotage more than anyone else that does it for us. For example, one example was used was when people try to lose weight. They lose 10 pounds. Okay, I'm going to reward myself this weekend and end up eating a whole pizza. So now self-sabotage yourself. You have to restart all over again. So now, in closing, and I honestly don't want to end this podcast because this is amazing conversation. But in closing, if you were somebody who was lost between their goals and couldn't find themselves or their values, they had lost it somehow. They thought money was their value, or they thought, business success was their value, but obviously they're not happy. What would be the best piece of advice you would give them?
Great question, Kaveh. And I think there's two ways to do this. And I really believe that we do live in at least in the space and time part of our universe. There's a whole other deeper conversation about past that, Kaveh, into the essence of energy. But in space and time, things show up in pairs, or what they call binomials, okay? And so I want to talk about this from a self standpoint and from an other standpoint. All right. And from a self standpoint, Kaveh, it seems completely almost counterintuitive. But I would encourage those people that are in that space, you said, they're lost, they don't know where they're at, what they're about, why they're not achieving their goals. I would encourage them to just stop the wheels of motion as quickly as possible. Stop, get quiet, sit in a comfortable space with as little outside noise, influence, anything coming through their five senses, as little as possible. And just breathe, right? And just focus on their breathing. It seems almost like kind of crazy and a little, airy foo-foo, but I can tell you that if you just stop long enough to shut off the outside noise and get quiet, it is the most direct, in my experience, Kaveh, it's the most direct access point to that older, wiser part of ourselves, that part of ourselves that we've been talking directly and indirectly about through this entire broadcast, So that's my first recommendation. And then be willing to let go of those thoughts. Because again, on average, a person has a thought every 3.6 seconds, whether you're a Buddhist monk been meditating for 40 years or your first day, So it's not a question of whether you have those thoughts, but can you just release those thoughts, not attach anything to them, particularly emotion to them, fear or whatever, and then just get quiet and still and just listen. And just listen to what comes up. I'm a big fan of nature, Kaveh. That's my church, my synagogue, my cathedral. I spend a lot of time there because I feel most connected to the essence of the universe, or to Mother Nature, or to God, if you will, there. And I just get still and quiet enough to listen. And sometimes it's just a wee small whisper. But I've learned from experience to pay attention to that little whisper and then take action on those whispers. So that's the self piece. The other piece, Kaveh, would be to, reach out to an influence in your life. Reach out to, I'm going to bet, Kaveh, in your practice, you got practice members do this all the time. Reach out, say, Dr. Kaveh, have you got a couple of minutes? I just need to talk to you, right? Reach out to someone that you feel is grounded, that is in a place of relative wisdom, and that knows you well enough to be willing to just listen and then maybe offer some feedback if you want feedback. Because many times, Kaveh, I find these people, they just need somebody to talk to. They just need to get it out of themselves. And then they get it out of themselves, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I have a great idea. It's like, oh, you're welcome. It's like, I referenced Peanuts earlier, the comic strip, Kaveh. I'll go back to Lucy with her 5-cent psychiatrist booth, It's like, talk. Oh, thanks, doc. She didn't say a word, And whether that's a person of influence or a health practitioner or a coach, consultant, I certainly have a lot of people who use me for that role, to just listen, because out of that, you can get all of the what my Jewish friends call the mishigash, the drunken monkeys running around on your head. Get it out of you so that you can get some clarity. I think those are two pieces of advice I'd love to offer.
Dr. Tom Preston, what can I say? You definitely over-delivered, sir. So now for our viewers, if they want to get a hold of you and find you, please give us all the website, the handles, the Instagram, and the YouTube where you can be found, please.
Well, I'm sure you'll put it in the notes for the show, Kaveh, but again, real simply for those that are, audio and maybe have a piece of paper, it's our website. It's spelled out long form, so it's a lot to type in the first time, but then it'll always be there. It's fullcirclecoachingandconsulting.com. fullcirclecoachingandconsulting.com. And of course, my private email off that is just Dr. Tom, drtom fullcirclecoachingandconsulting.com. And Kaveh, I'm happy to share even my private cell phone number too. I mean, people that are connected to you, they're people I'd want to know. So my private cell phone, 705, in Canada, 705-477-1803. Happy to entertain dialogue, text message, or whatever. I would love to meet the people that you influence, Kaveh, because you are an influencer, sir. And I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I absolutely love the opportunity to meet people that are on purpose, that have taken the time to know themselves and are willing to stand in the light of courage to share their gifts with the world, which, sir, in so many ways you are. So thank you for who you are and what you do, Kaveh, and for inviting me to be a part of this. It's been an honor.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Tom. Hopefully we can have you on sometime in future at a perfect time for you, so we can have some more questions and we will go over basically other topics that we didn't get a chance to touch on today.
I would love that very much, Kaveh. Anytime, sir.
Thank you, sir.